In this lesson, we are going to be applying some tweaks, fixes to the dummy data quiz that we created in the last lesson. So this lesson, we are adding styling and also bug fixing any of the application problems. So we generated random JSON data so we can adjust how much data that we're generating. So essentially how many questions that we're generating for the quiz. And this is a dynamically driven quiz using the JSON data. So it asks you a question, it provides you some options, and of course the correct one here is different than the other ones. So we know from the dummy data which options and then also which one's correct. So if you select the correct one, you get the message, great, you got it right, and that updates your score at the end. And it is keeping track of the score, so it goes red if you get it wrong. And that also goes for the buttons. So they're actually disabled, so you can't click them anymore. And then once you move through all the questions, it's providing the information to the user, which question they're on, and it's outputting the question, so it's easy to read. And then once it comes to the last question, once it's got no more questions, it doesn't say next question, it says game over, see score, and when you click that, then you get the game over message and what you scored on the application. So we're applying some styling to the application and any bug fixes and tweaks. So let's get started. So we generated in the last lesson some JSON data and created a mini application that's going to be driven by the JSON data. So there's a few bugs and tweaks that need to be made, and one of the best ways to ensure that the functionality is there, and I usually like to have the functionality before I apply the styling, so that the styling just is a distraction while you're trying to build and make sure your application is working properly. So that's the case that we're doing right now, is we're playing through it and we're seeing where we run into some issues, and then we'll apply some styling to the pages. So one of the main things is that now if I run out of questions, I still have an option to hit and move to the next question. So that option should not be there. So let's check, and where we're writing the next question value, let's ensure that we do have additional questions that are available there. So we also want to pull this out and just have a condition here that's going to check to see if game current is going to be larger than the temp data length, and if it is, then we know that we're not moving to the next question, and if it isn't, then we're going to just move to the next question. So that just means that the quiz is going to be done, and then we have an option to we don't have an option to display it. We don't have next question. We have game over, see score, or something like that. And we'll still display the button. And you have an option as well. You don't have to display the button. So if the current value, so we've increased it by 1, if it's larger than the length, then the game is actually going to stop running. I'm going to adjust the number of questions that we're creating, so we can just have the 2 questions and have 1 of 2. So that way we can complete the game a lot easier. So it still is looking for that, but we didn't get the right option here as well. So we shouldn't see next question. We should see that if it's equal to or greater than, then we know we're done. So game over, see the score. So we know at this point the game is completed. And game over, and we'll set that to be false. And that way we can check the game over when we're moving to the next question, when we're generating a question, and we'll check to see if game over. So if it's false, then we know we can generate a question. And if it's true, then we'll have to do something else. So in this case, we can have else. And if the game is over, then we'll just put it to the console. Or actually, let's update the HTML and just have the output HTML equal to game over. And I'll use the backtick so I can output the score. Game over, and outputting it as HTML. So just do a line break there, and then the game score, and we'll prefix it with score so the users know what we've output there. So let's play through it and see what happens. So game over is not defined. So let's see what happened here. And that actually should be a dot instead of a comma. So we're throwing the error there. So far so good. So game over, see score. And we're still moving on to the next question. So we need to, so if game over is false, so we want to set the game over to be true. So that should prevent us from being able to move on to the next question. So we've got game over and the score value that's being output there. Maybe we also want to have this as an H1 and close that off, and then do this as an H2. So that's it. So there we've got our completed game over, score 1, 2 of 2 questions. We can restart and play through it a few times just to make sure that everything is working. So we got the score 1. And we can also do out of, and then whatever we had for the temp data length. So that will provide some more details to the user. And these are all just optional tweaks. So we got score 0 out of 2. We're on question 2 of 2. So everything looks like it's working. So that means that we're ready to apply some styling. And then you can also make any other tweaks and adjustments as needed that suit the purposes of what you're trying to do. Let's update and add some styling onto the page. You can also, best practices is of course to link to a style sheet, but in this case, because we've just got the one single page application and we want to focus on the JavaScript, I'll just do the on-page styling. So when we do have a button object, let's update the padding of the button. So 10 pixels and font size, so make it a little bit bigger. Then we can adjust it as needed. So that's our button to start the game. And also let's set a background color for the button. And we'll set all the buttons to black and then set the font color to be white. And if we hover over a button, so applying a pseudo class, I usually just like to adjust the opacity. And let's update the cursor to pointer. And maybe it's a little bit too much opacity for the button. So that way if you do have the button, and maybe we'll set it at 8. So we've got all of the buttons there that we've listed. We also might want to update for the question object. And that can be our class that we can apply to the question and do a larger font size. And I'm also going to go over to the Google Fonts. Let's add some fonts to the project as well. If you go to fonts.google.com, there's a good selection of various fonts that you can pick from. So select a font that something you want to use, then select the font. You can do an import on the font content. And that way, within the body, let's just set the font family within the body. So it's going to apply it to the whole page. So that updated the fonts that are being used. And let's do a display block for this, and then border, and do a slight border around it, and then some padding as well, and apply that to the question object. So wherever we're writing the question, so select the element that you want to apply the class to and apply the class accordingly. So there's our question. Let's also apply a class to the options. So these are the option buttons, and maybe we want to set a different background color to them of blue. And let's add in some margin of 5 pixels to them. And also add in a border radius, so distinguish them from the other buttons on the page. So these are the options. So as we create the select, take the class list and add the class of options to it. So we start the game, we got these nice options, and I should add some more padding to it. So our option buttons are going to be larger, more padding. Wasn't enough padding. We also, for this message, let's make that one big. So text align and center align that, and set the width to be 70%. Font size is going to be 2EM. Color, and we can set the color to be red. And this is going to be going for this little message thing that we have here. Let's set a margin of 20 pixels around it. And actually we're going to do top and bottom for 20 pixels, and right and left can just be auto. So that will center the message. And where we're outputting the message, let's add in a div. You can also do the create element to create a div. So it's going to be attaching a class of message. And just to save a little bit of time doing it this way. So those are the two options that you have when you're creating the elements. Great, you got it right. And then it's looking for the next question. And maybe this message should update depending on if we got it right or wrong. And let's actually, we'll set the color. We'll create an object here, and this can by default be red, since most of them are going to be red. And then here, so we can do this dynamically, so we don't have to rewrite it. So it'll just set whatever the background is. And then here we take background and we can set it to green. And whereas this one's going to stay red. And also let's set one for mess. So the message is going to be wrong, too bad. And that's the message that we're going to output. And then if we do get it right, then we'll update the message. And that way we can remove the wrong altogether. So we don't have to even include that. So we don't have to have an else. By default, it's going to output the content as wrong. And using the backticks. And I'll add in the style attribute. And do a background color and whatever the value of BG is. And close off. And then within the message area, let's output the message here. So see how that looks? Too bad, wrong. And this one, great, you got it right. So for whatever reason, it's not updating the background color. So let's see what happened there. And the property actually is going to be dash background color. So that's why that didn't update. So let's try that one more time. And we actually want to set the color of the font, not the background. too bad you got it wrong, and great, you got it right. So again, play through it a number of times just to make sure that things are working as expected. And you can also update the objects, try outputting different objects on the page, update the number of random questions that you're generating. Have some fun with it and get some good practice with constructing JSON objects. Now that we're generating random JSON data and we've constructed a dynamic application that's driven by the JSON data, it's time to debug through the application. So play through the application and make sure that it's working as expected, and then adjust the JSON data, add in more questions, update and add in some more fields and options, and ensure that those are working, and apply styling as needed. So that's whatever your preference is on the styling, apply that to the page and the web application.